This is the reply I received from my MP in August. Please find enclosed a copy of my response from Lord Freud, Minister for Welfare Reform, concerning the definition of a bedroom and the legality of the bedroom tax. The response was not to my satisfaction, and I am certain you will disagree also with the Minister, but I trust that it will add to your understanding on the points you raise. With this in consideration, and with the High Court ruling on the 31st of 7/13 that the policy was legal when tried against equality and human rights legislation, I believe unfortunately we have to accept that the current government are intent on continuing its programme of reckless and ill thought out welfare reforms that will end up costing the taxpayers more, not less. While it may be held as legal in our courts to many with disabilities, this comes as a devastating blow and will inflict real pain in our communities. As I've stated in previous correspondence, I'm firmly against this policy and would have liked the Scottish Government to have legislated against evictions due to the tax. However, they failed to do so. Housing is a devolved matter, and it's my strong opinion that the Scottish Government should have taken much greater steps to mitigate the effects of this destructive policy. It would seem to me that the only way this policy stands any chance of being changed would be to see a change in government after the next election. I will continue to work with the Leader of the Opposition, Ed Miliband, to press the need for such a policy shift. The reply from Lord Freud, the Department of Works and Pensions: thank you for your letter of the 19th on behalf of one of your constituents regarding housing benefit. Replying as the Minister responsible for this area, the Department of Works, and apologise for the delay in doing so. Your constituent is concerned that the introduction of the removal of spare room subsidy is a breach of the Human Rights Act of 1998. It may be helpful if I explain a little more about the reasons for this change. The cost of housing benefit to the taxpayer has increased by 50% over the last decade, with overall expenditure of $24 billion in 2012-2013. And for the social sector tenants alone, the bill totaled $15 billion. This is unsustainable, particularly in the current economic climate, which is why we have embarked on a major programme of reform to the housing benefit system. We have already tightened the system for tenants renting in the private sector. Extending the size criteria to those living in the social rented sector will result in equality of treatment with those living in the private sector and drive better value for money for taxpayers by incentivising both tenants and landlords to make better use of their housing stock. We do not know how individual claimants will respond to this change and the choices they will make. However, there is a range of options available to them, which could include moving into work, funding the shortfall from other incomes or savings, offering out their spare room, or indeed moving to more suitably sized accommodation. Many of these decisions will be determined by the personal circumstances of the claimants and will depend upon local availability of housing. The regulations were debated extensively prior to receiving parliamentary approval, and we believe that these measures are lawful and do not contravene human rights legislation. We are aware of the impact that the removal of the spare room subsidy is likely to have on some groups, and in order to mitigate this, funding for the discretionary housing payment scheme has been significantly increased to £150 million for the period 2013 to 2014. This funding includes an additional £25 million specifically for disabled people who live in specially adapted accommodation who are affected by this measure, along with £20 million baseline funding. Discretionary housing payments may be awarded in addition to any welfare benefits when a local authority considers that a claimant requires further financial assistance towards housing costs. Local authorities have a broad discretion under these regulations, but when formulating the policy and making decisions, they must comply with the general principles of good decision making, taking account of the public sector equality duties and the obligations under the Human Rights Act 1998. Therefore, we have provided additional funding and implemented measures to assist those wishing to move to more appropriately sized accommodation while maintaining a level of support for those who would be most disadvantaged or would face greater difficulty in finding alternative suitable accommodation. With regard to your constituents' inquiry about what constitutes a bedroom, we do not define what we mean by a bedroom or what size it should be within housing benefit legislation. The landlord will have determined how many bedrooms a property contains, and as rent levels generally reflect the number of bedrooms in a property and may take their size into account, it is in the tenant's best interests to decide at that point of accepting the tenancy whether the rooms are of suitable size for their needs. The Department for Communities and Local Government has published statutory guidance which includes advice to the effect that landlords, when allocating property, should make households aware of the implications in relation to the housing benefit in the event of under-occupation. There are minimum space standards that are used to assess statutory overcrowding, and that these are set out in Section 326 of the Housing Act 1985. This provides that the space standard is contravened when the number of people sleeping in a dwelling is in excess of the permitted number, having regard to the number and floor area of the rooms available as sleeping accommodation, and for this purpose a living room is counted as a bedroom. The removal of the spare room subsidy does not, however, apply to a minimum floor space for bedrooms. It takes account of the number of bedrooms as designated by the landlord, and it compares this with the composition of the household to establish whether or not a reduction due to under-occupation applies.